You know, usually when we talk about a diagnostic process, say in medicine or, I don't know, structural engineering, there's this inherent expectation of precision. It's binary, right?
Right. It either works or it doesn't.
Exactly. Like you take a structural scan of a bridge support and the telemetry shows a microfracture in the steel. The engineer just points at the readout and says, there it is. That's the failure point.
Yeah, it's a very comforting paradigm. I mean, we are fundamentally wired to appreciate things that can be categorized cleanly into working or broken. It gives us this illusion of control.
It really does. But then you step into the world of incident response and digital forensics and institutional law, and suddenly that clean, objective diagnostic machine is just shattered.
Oh, absolutely. It's a mess.
Yeah, you're looking at a landscape that is, quite frankly, a swamp. And it's not just that the data is complex, it's that the people operating the diagnostic tools often have this massive vested interest in the readout being wrong.
Or, and this is arguably more dangerous, they lack the foundational literacy to understand the readout in the first place.
Right.
Because when the entity reading the forensic telemetry doesn't actually understand the architecture of the network they are analyzing, well, they fall back on storytelling.
Yeah.
The telemetry becomes secondary to the narrative.
And that collision right there between forensic truth and institutional storytelling, that brings us to the mission of today's deep dive.
I'm really looking forward to unpacking this one.
Me too. We are exploring Alberto Daniel Hill, and if you look at the Latin American cybersecurity landscape, and increasingly on the global stage, he is easily one of the most polarizing and influential figures operating today.
Without a doubt.
So our focus today is to really describe and analyze his footprint in the cybersecurity industry. We are looking at a man who operates at this bizarre, almost unprecedented intersection of digital forensics, geopolitical strategy, and deeply personal memoir.
Yeah, he defines easy categorization. I mean, out of the roughly 5.5 million cybersecurity professionals operating globally right now, the vast majority function within these established corporate or government hierarchies.
They patch the firewalls, they run the compliance audits, they follow the standard playbook.
Exactly. But Alberto Daniel Hill is categorized in the intelligence as an independent digital dissident. He occupies this highly specialized niche entirely outside the traditional institutional framework.
And to really grasp the gravity of his work today here in 2026, I want you, the listener, to put yourself in a very specific headspace for a second.
This is a great thought experiment.
Right. Okay, so imagine you are conducting a routine sweep, just poking around, and you stumble onto a glaring, catastrophic vulnerability in the database of a massive medical provider.
Total worst-case scenario.
Yeah, and you're a professional. You understand the implications. So you do the right thing. You follow the established protocols for responsible disclosure. You meticulously document the flaw. You hand it over to the national cert authorities. You explain the remediation steps. And, you walk away knowing you did your civic duty.
You've effectively handed them the exact blueprint they need to secure their perimeter before a threat actor finds that same open window.
Precisely. Now, fast forward 3 years. The organization never closed the window. A completely unknown threat actor slips through that exact same vulnerability, encrypts the network, and demands a ransom.
Which happens all too often, sadly.
Right, but here's the twist. Instead of the state deploying its resources to, say, track the blockchain transactions and hunt down the actual extortionist, the police kick down your door.
It has the cadence of a dystopian thriller, really. I mean, the state, faced with its own incompetence, retroactively weaponizes your ethical disclosure against you.
It's insane. But it's not a hypothetical thriller. It is the rigorously documented reality of Uruguay's first imprisoned hacker. And we have the documents right here on the desk to prove it.
We have quite the stack today.
We do. We're looking at forensic intelligence dossier, his speaker briefing from DEF CON 2026, excerpts from this whole Cybermidnight Club ecosystem he built, Wikipedia sandbox entries, and direct excerpts from his books.
It's a massive amount of source material.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. How does an established, highly credentialed computer engineer end up in maximum security just for reporting a vulnerability? And more importantly, how does that specific trauma catalyze a fundamental shift in how we approach asymmetric digital defense?
Well, to understand the mechanism of that shift, we really have to look at his baseline. Because the profound irony of Alberto Daniel Hill's situation is that he wasn't some fringe underground antagonist.
Right, yeah.
He was the establishment. We're talking about someone who was self-taught on a Sinclair Spectrum in the 80s, diving into assembler language as a kid. And by 2003, he's a graduated computer engineer.
That's a solid foundation.
Yeah, and by 2004, he is literally pioneering digital forensics in Uruguay.
Wait, he was collaborating with Interpol, right? Like standardizing the procedural methodologies for handling digital evidence in severe crimes, child exploitation cases, things like that.
Exactly. He wasn't just a participant, he was writing the rules. He held the PMP, the CEH, and had these deep specializations in the ISO IE 27000 series.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. And for anyone working in governance, risk, and compliance, the 27000 series isn't just about technical controls. It's about the entire philosophy of information security management.
So he understood the bureaucratic language of security better than the state did.
Far better. Which brings us to the critical inflection point in 2014, what they call the ethical action.
Okay, scene for this.
So Hill is probing the external perimeter of Círculo Católico. This is a major Uruguayan healthcare provider. And he finds a vulnerability.
Now, let me jump in here, because when we say vulnerability, I think people immediately jump to, like, sophisticated polymorphic malware or some crazy zero-day exploit requiring a chain of memory buffer overflows.
Oh, yeah, like something out of a movie.
Right, but that wasn't the case here, was it?
Not even close. The vulnerability was default administrative credentials, admin/admin.
Admin. I mean, wow, it is the absolute floor of operational security failure.
It's inexcusable.
You have a sprawling healthcare database containing hypersensitive protected health information. We're talking patient histories, diagnostics, internal communications, and the perimeter defense is literally a default string that ships out of the box on cheap consumer-grade routers.
Yeah, it indicates a total systemic absence of identity and access management.
So what does Hal do?
Well, recognizing the severity, he does exactly what the global InfoSec community dictates. He packages the findings and securely transmits them to CERTUI, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team of Uruguay.
So he creates a solid paper trail of his ethical disclosure.
A paper trail that effectively goes straight into a black hole for 3 years. The authorities receive it, the healthcare provider presumably ignores it, and life just continues.
Until 2017.
Until 2017. The inevitable happens. A malicious threat actor discovers that the admin door is still swinging wide open in the breeze.
Of course they do.
They breach the Círculo Católico infrastructure, exfiltrate the patient data, and execute a ransomware attack demanding a payment of 15 bitcoins.
Which I have to say is a catastrophic scenario for the healthcare provider and the state. You have a critical infrastructure entity brought to its knees, patient data is compromised, and there's a ticking clock on a crypto extortion demand.
The panic must have been palpable.
Right. The pressure on the judiciary and the national police to produce a result to parade a perpetrator in front of the media must have been immense.
The pressure was existential, and this is exactly where we see the absolute collapse of analytical rigor. The state forms a task force. They give it this grand title, Operation Bitcoins.
Very cinematic.
Very. But instead of executing a competent incident response, deploying blockchain heuristics to trace the wallet, analyzing the malicious payload for attribution markers, or hunting the command and control infrastructure, they just look at the access logs.
And what do they see?
They see that Alberto Daniel Hill had probed that specific interface 3 years earlier to report the flaw.
And because they lack the technical literacy to differentiate between a benign port scan for vulnerability disclosure and a malicious, financially motivated data exfiltration event, they just merge the two.
They completely conflate them.
They take the 2014 ethical researcher and turn him into the 2017 extortionist.
What's fascinating here is that they retroactively criminalized his disclosure. It's the ultimate manifestation of institutional panic. They needed a guy, and he was the guy on the log.
It's staggering. Let me try to frame this in a physical context, because sometimes the digital abstractions sort of softens the blow.
Oh, for it.
It's like a certified building inspector walking through a municipal facility, right? And he finds a basement room filled with exposed wiring and open gasoline canisters. So he submits a formal hazard report to the city council.
Standard procedure.
Exactly. The city files the report in a cabinet and forgets about it entirely. 3 years later, an arsonist breaks in, drops a match in that exact room, and burns the whole facility to the foundation.
Right.
And the city's immediate response is to dispatch a SWAT team to arrest the building inspector, solely because he possessed the knowledge that the room was flammable 3 years ago.
That analogy holds up perfectly, particularly regarding the concept of technological illiteracy within the justice system. I mean, the judiciary didn't have the capacity to evaluate the digital evidence objectively.
They just relied on proximity.
Exactly. Hill was adjacent to the technology. Therefore, in their completely uneducated eyes, he was culpable.
But this is the part that I find genuinely difficult to reconcile. I mean, I understand institutional panic, sure,
Sure.
but we are talking about a state apparatus. They have forensic analysts, they have Interpol liaisons. How does a prosecutor stand in front of a judge and justify detaining a highly credentialed engineer in maximum security for 8 months without hard cryptographic proof? I mean, didn't they have digital forensics?
That question cuts to the absolute core of Hill's subsequent work. The short answer is they didn't need cryptographic proof because they utilized what Hill later codified as forensic theater.
Forensic theater, I like that term.
It's incredibly accurate. They overwhelmed the judicial process with procedural noise and mischaracterized artifacts to create the illusion of an airtight case.
Let's break down the mechanics of that forensic theater.
Yeah.
Because based on the dossier, the specific procedural failures documented during the raid and the investigation, they're a masterclass in how not to handle digital evidence.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's look at the seizure of his Samsung Galaxy S7.
Yeah, this is perhaps the most egregious technical violation in the entire dossier. When law enforcement executed the warrant on Hill's residence, they seized his hardware, including this smartphone. Now, at the time of seizure, the device was powered off.
Okay, powered off.
Right. Now, anyone who has taken a basic 101 course in digital forensics, and certainly anyone adhering to the ISO IEC 27037 standard for the identification and collection of digital evidence, knows the cardinal rule of handling a seized, powered-off mobile device.
You do not turn it on, period. You place it in a Faraday bag to block any remote wipe signals, and you maintain its powered-down state until you can execute a physical extraction of the flash memory in a sterile lab environment.
Exactly, because the second you initiate the boot sequence on a modern smartphone, you alter the evidence. It is a fundamental law of computing.
Right, because my understanding is that the moment the OS loads, it's not just passively sitting there, right? Like, it's actively writing to the disk.
Constantly.
It's initiating background daemons, running garbage collection algorithms on the NAND flash memory, pinging the nearest cell tower, updating the system clock. It is aggressively overwriting volatile system logs.
It goes beyond just overwriting logs, though. You are actively destroying the snapshot of the volatile memory, the RAM.
Right, the RAM.
In complex cyber investigations, the RAM can contain unencrypted cryptographic keys, active network socket connections, or fragments of malware that only exist in memory and never actually touch the hard disk.
Oh, wow. So it's incredibly delicate.
Highly delicate. So
Yeah.
by taking that powered-off S7 and simply turning it on just to see what was on the screen, the Interpol agents permanently corrupted the state of the device. They basically trampled the digital crime scene.
And Hill, sitting there in handcuffs, having literally written operational protocols for digital forensics earlier in his career, is forced to just watch them destroy the integrity of the evidence that could have exonerated him.
Yeah, it's a profound psychological violation. To watch the system you helped build turn around and act with such gross incompetence.
But the theater extended beyond just gross incompetence, didn't it? It moved into deliberate mischaracterization of evidence.
It absolutely did.
Right.
When they seized his workstations, they found standard professional software.
The pen testing tools.
Yes. Tools like Nmap for network discovery, Wireshark for packet analysis, Metasploit. I mean, if you are an ethical hacker, a penetration tester, or just a network engineer, these are the hammers and screwdrivers of your trade.
They're ubiquitous in the industry.
Ubiquitous. But the prosecution presented these tools to the judge not as industry-standard auditing software, but as a bespoke criminal arsenal.
That is wild. It leverages the complete ignorance of the bench.
Exactly.
If the judge doesn't know what a packet sniffer is, and the prosecutor ominously describes it as some weaponized surveillance apparatus used to intercept encrypted communications, the judge assumes they are dealing with a cyber terrorist. It's entirely manipulative.
It is entirely manipulative, and honestly, it reached its absolute zenith with the physical Bitcoin tokens.
Okay, this detail. I read this in the dossier, and it almost feels like it belongs in a dark comedy.
It really does.
The state is investigating an extortion demand for 15 actual digital Bitcoins on the blockchain, right?
Correct.
And during the raid, they find novelty physical Bitcoin tokens in Hell's apartment. You know, the little stamped metal coins you can buy online for like $5 as paperweights or desk ornaments?
Yeah, the shiny metal ones with the big B on them.
Right. They have zero cryptographic value. They aren't cold storage wallets. They don't have a microchip in them. They are just pieces of metal.
And yet they were logged into the chain of custody.
Yeah.
And they were presented in a court of law as tangible evidentiary proof of cyber extortion. The prosecution held up a cheap metal trinket and essentially said, "Look, Your Honor, the stolen cryptocurrency. We found it."
I mean, that completely exposes the farce of the proceeding. It's embarrassing.
It is.
But while the novelty coins are absurd and sort of funny in a dark way, the final procedural failure, the spoliation of his digital assets, is where the real devastation occurs. Because when they raided his home, they didn't just take his physical hardware, they took his two-factor authentication seeds.
The 2FA backup codes.
Yeah.
This part is incredibly frustrating. For listeners operating in the crypto space, you know that your security architecture relies heavily on HMAC-based one-time passwords.
Right.
When you set up an authenticator app, it generates a master seed phrase or a QR code. If you lose your primary device, that seed is literally the only way to reestablish access to your exchange accounts.
And Hill, being a prudent security professional, had his 2FA seeds backed up physically, probably on a piece of paper. The state seized those backups and threw them into an evidence locker. Now, under standard legal doctrine, if the state seizes your assets during an investigation, they have a custodial duty to preserve the value of those assets, don't they?
They absolutely do. And they failed spectacularly.
Yeah.
Because while Hill was languishing in a maximum security cell entirely cut off from the outside world, the cryptocurrency exchange he heavily utilized, WEX.NZ, began showing severe signs of insolvency.
The market was crashing.
The market was crashing hard.
And he knows this. He's sitting in a cell, and through whatever fragments of information he can gather from lawyers or visitors, he realizes his exchange is collapsing.
He knows he has to act.
He knows he needs to log in, liquidate his positions, and move the funds to a secure cold wallet, but he can't. He doesn't have his hardware. More importantly, he doesn't have his 2FA seeds.
So he petitions the state.
Right. He says, just give me access to my backup code so I can secure my life savings. Just let me log in.
And the state refused.
Just flatly refused.
Flatly. The technical illiteracy of the investigators meant they couldn't comprehend the urgency. To them, a piece of paper with a seed phrase was just an inert piece of evidence.
Yeah.
They couldn't grasp that it was a live, highly time-sensitive key to a deteriorating financial position.
That is maddening.
And as a direct result of that custodial negligence, when WX.NZ ultimately collapsed, Hill lost over $100,000.
It is custodial theft via bureaucratic friction. I mean, he didn't lose his money because he made a bad trade. He lost his life savings because a technically illiterate investigator threw his master keys into a plastic baggie and refused to understand the mechanics of decentralized finance.
Imagine losing everything you've worked for just because of that. That combination of factors.
Yeah.
The 8 months in maximum security, the forensic contamination, the character assassination, and the total financial wipeout. I mean, it would have broken almost anyone.
Yeah, the default human response to that level of systemic trauma is retreat. You just want to hide.
But Hill didn't retreat. He engineered. And this is where we pivot from the specific tragedy of Operation Bitcoins to the macro-level impact Hill has actually had on the cybersecurity industry. He realized something crucial. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as designed.
Wow. Okay, unpack that. Because he formalized this realization into a theory he calls algorithmic jurisprudence, right?
Yes, and it's a crucial concept. Hill postulates that major institutions, whether it's a national police force, a judiciary, or a massive multinational corporation, they do not operate as truth-seeking entities. They operate as a machine. The great machine, as he calls it.
A great machine.
And the foundational algorithm of this machine is self-preservation at all costs.
Right. So when Circulo Católico was breached, the immediate institutional priority wasn't to secure the data or understand the vector. It was to protect the reputation of the healthcare provider and the state apparatus.
Exactly. They execute what Hill calls the protocol of silence. You deny, you obfuscate, and if forced, you scapegoat.
So algorithmic jurisprudence means the legal system just blindly executes a script.
Precisely. It isolates a target who is politically or socially convenient. In this case, an independent researcher with proximity to the vulnerability. It overwhelms that target with the weight of the state. It utilizes forensic theater to bypass the need for actual evidence, and it closes the file.
Because truth is completely irrelevant to the algorithm.
Completely irrelevant.
So, if you are an ethical researcher or a penetration tester or just a technically curious citizen, and you find yourself caught in the crosshairs of the great machine, how do you fight back? Because as Hill discovered firsthand, standing in a courtroom trying to explain the difference between a port scan and a ransomware payload to a judge who doesn't understand TCP/IP, is a losing battle.
It's an impossible battle. You can't fight institutional momentum with nuanced technical testimony.
So what's the alternative?
You have to change the battlefield entirely. You have to remove the emotional, subjective interpretation of the evidence and replace it with an irrebatable mathematical framework. And that was the genesis of the Forensic Risk Indicator, or the FRI.
The FRI. This is brilliant because it takes the raw trauma of his prosecution and distills it into a reproducible diagnostic tool.
Exactly.
It is an open source, 0 to 10 scoring model designed to objectively evaluate the integrity of an investigation. It literally allows a defendant to mathematically prove forensic malpractice.
Let's delve into the mechanics of the FRI, because it's incredibly robust. It's composed of 5 distinct submetrics. When a researcher is targeted, they don't just go online and complain or proclaim their innocence. They publish a radar chart scoring the state's investigation across these 5 vectors.
Okay, let's walk through them. The first one is EHI, Evidence Handling Integrity.
Right. And this ties directly back to his experience with the Samsung S7. EHI doesn't ask for a subjective opinion on whether the police did a good job. It asks binary questions based on established standards.
Like, did the investigators adhere to ISO IE 27037?
Exactly. Did they power on a seized device? Did they utilize write blockers during data acquisition? If the answer is no, the state's EHI score plummets. You are mathematically demonstrating that the volatile memory was compromised, rendering the evidence mathematically unstable.
There's no arguing with that. It's just a fact. Okay, what's the second metric?
The second is attribution stability, or AS. This measures the rigor of the connection between the suspect and the malicious activity.
So, are the authorities relying on hard cryptographic signatures, verified payload analysis, and deep packet inspection?
Or are they relying on a 3-year-old Apache server log showing a basic HTTP request and attempting to stretch that into proof of a ransomware deployment? If the attribution relies on proximity rather than cryptographic proof, the stability score is 0.
That makes total sense. Now, the third metric, narrative consistency in C, is perhaps the most devastating when applied to corporate breaches, I think, because this metric forces a direct comparison between the hard technical telemetry and the public relations narrative deployed by the institution.
Oh, it completely highlights the hypocrisy. Think about it. If a corporate PR firm issues a press release claiming they were the victim of an advanced persistent threat utilizing zero-day, zero-click exploits.
Which sounds very scary and unavoidable.
Right, but then the internal Active Directory logs show the threat actor simply logged in over a VPN because an administrator disabled multi-factor authentication.
Well, then the narrative consistency is completely broken. It mathematically exposes the lie.
Precisely. Then you have the fourth metric, defensive posture or defendant profiling, DP. This evaluates the psychological framing utilized by the prosecution.
This is the novelty Bitcoin thing, right? Like, are they presenting standard benign industry tools like Nmap or Wireshark as a bespoke weaponized arsenal?
Yes. If the state has to artificially inflate the threat profile of the defendant to justify their heavy-handed tactics, the FRI flags it as a massive indicator of forensic weakness. The state is compensating for a lack of evidence with aggressive rhetoric.
It's all smoke and mirrors.
And finally, the fifth metric, response behavior, RB. This metric analyzes how the investigating body reacts to external scrutiny. When independent researchers or journalists point out the flaws in the forensic methodology, does the institution engage transparently? Or do they resort to psychological or legal coercion?
Like denying an inmate essential medication while in maximum security to force a confession, or threatening journalists with SLAPP suits.
Exactly. If an institution leverages physical custody or aggressive litigation to silence technical critique, they fail the response behavior metric.
Right.
The FRI synthesizes all these failures into a single, undeniable score.
So it allows the researcher to say, don't take my word for it, look at the math. Their EHI is a 2, their narrative consistency is a 1. The investigation is mathematically invalid.
It's incredibly empowering. It shifts the power dynamic from he said, she said, to objective data.
It really is. But, and I think this is where it gets really interesting, and it's a crucial pivot in Hill's philosophy. A scorecard is ultimately just a piece of paper.
Right.
Knowing the bridge is structurally compromised doesn't stop it from collapsing under you.
That's a very good point.
An ethical researcher armed with an FRI chart is still just one person standing against the infinite resources of the state or a multinational corporation.
Which is exactly why the FRI is only the diagnostic component. To actually survive, you need an operational strategy to deploy that diagnostic tool effectively. you need a way to neutralize the asymmetric power of the great machine.
Enter the playbook.
Right. Hill engineered a comprehensive methodology for this, which he titled the Asymmetric Playbook.
The asymmetric playbook. From reading the sources, it's basically a masterclass in utilizing the weight of the system against itself. It's a 4-step survival guide for the digital dissident. Let's walk through it. Step 1 is zero contact disclosure,
which completely rewrites the established industry norm for ethical reporting. Because Hill learned the hard way that the established norm is a trap.
Explain that. Why is it a trap?
If you find a critical vulnerability in a massive corporation, and you walk through the front door, email their CISO from your personal account, and hand them a detailed report, you are immediately perceived as a threat. The machine's reflex is to shoot the messenger to contain the liability.
So zero contact disclosure mandates that you never ever expose your identity to the vulnerable entity.
Never.
So mechanically, how do you execute a disclosure without making contact? It sounds like you have to set up some kind of cryptographic dead man switch.
Essentially, yes. You utilize decentralized reputation firewalls. Before you ever initiate contact, you document the vulnerability. You cryptographically sign the hashes, the packet captures, the proof of concept exploit.
Okay.
Then you anchor that data on immutable decentralized ledgers or platforms like IPFS. You lock the forensic truth into the public domain with a verifiable timestamp.
So you establish the ground truth before the corporation can manufacture a lie.
Exactly. Then you use trusted anonymous intermediaries, perhaps an established journalist or an international bug bounty triage platform to broker the disclosure.
Oh, that's smart.
If the corporation attempts the protocol of silence or tries to legally threaten the intermediary, you just release the cryptographic proof. You remove their ability to control the narrative entirely.
It's preemptive self-defense. Now, step 2 of the playbook is where I think Hill's strategic brilliance really shines. The proxy pivot. This is all about weaponizing international bureaucracy against local incompetence.
It is a stunning application of geopolitical leverage. Let's look at Latin America, where Hill operates heavily. Historically, data protection frameworks in the region have been inconsistent. Fines for corporate negligence might be negligible, and the local judiciary might be susceptible to corporate influence.
Right, but then you look across the ocean, and the European Union has the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation.
And the defining feature of the GDPR is its extraterritorial scope. Article 3 states that if a company is processing the data of EU residents, they are subject to EU law, regardless of where the company is physically headquartered.
And the penalties are massive, right? Up to 4% of global annual revenue.
Exactly. And here is the genius part. Hill possesses dual Italian-Uruguayan citizenship.
Oh, wow.
This is his fulcrum. If a Latin American corporation suffers a catastrophic breach and attempts to cover it up, Hill doesn't waste time arguing in local courts. He executes the proxy pivot. He files a formal, highly detailed technical complaint directly with the Garante, the Italian Data Protection Authority.
So, by acting as a proxy EU resident, he single-handedly drags a local, potentially corrupt corporate entity into the crosshairs of a massive, well-funded European regulatory apparatus.
Yes. The local machine suddenly has to answer to Brussels. It completely bypasses the local judicial bottlenecks.
It is asymmetric warfare at its finest. He literally uses the bureaucratic density of the EU to crush the corporate silence of his target.
It's incredible. And step 3, the spoliation ultimatum, applies a very similar logic to the local legal system.
This directly addresses his financial ruin during the WEX.NZ collapse, doesn't it? We've established that criminal courts are fundamentally ill-equipped to handle the nuances of digital assets. Like, if a detective throws your hard drive in a microwave, the criminal court might just view it as an unfortunate procedural error.
Right. But civil courts understand financial damages intimately. The spoliation ultimatum advises researchers who have had their assets degraded by state incompetence to bypass the criminal defense regarding the technology and aggressively pursue civil litigation for tortious interference and custodial theft.
So, you don't sue them over a breach of ISO IX 270-7. You sue them because their negligence resulted in a quantifiable loss of $100,000 in asset value. You hit the institution in the only metric they truly respect, their budget.
It forces a financial reckoning. If law enforcement agencies realize that botching a digital seizure will result in massive civil liabilities, they are financially incentivized to actually train their personnel properly.
That makes total sense. Make it hurt their wallet and they'll change their procedures.
Okay, and finally, step 4 of the playbook, psych legal certs.
Yeah. Traditional computer emergency response teams, CERTs. They're designed to protect hardware and software. They patch the servers. They isolate the malware. Hill argues that the InfoSec community needs equivalent infrastructure to protect the people.
Because when a researcher is targeted by the state, the isolation has to be profound.
It is. The psych legal certs are decentralized, rapid response networks. When an ethical hacker is framed, this network activates. They provide immediate, vetted legal counsel. They provide secure communications. They analyze the state's forensic claims and publish FRI scores. And most importantly, they provide psychological support to counter the immense coercive pressure of solitary confinement and state intimidation.
Exactly. It's an ecosystem of mutual defense.
Wow.
Which brings us to the core engine powering all of these tactics. The guiding philosophy that Hill operates under is what the intelligence dossiers refer to as radical transparency.
Radical transparency, which is the direct antithesis of the protocol of silence. The great machine relies on obfuscation, classification, and secrecy to maintain its authority. But Hill posits that for a dissident, secrecy is actually a vulnerability. Transparency is the only viable shield.
And he implies this transparency relentlessly. He doesn't just publish the technical hashes of a vulnerability or the PGP sign network logs. He publishes his own internal state.
That is a very critical distinction because the InfoSec community is notoriously guarded. It's an industry practically built on paranoia.
Very true.
But Hill actively discusses his severe PTSD stemming from his imprisonment. He publishes his mistakes, his strategic miscalculations, his psychological struggles. Why is that strategically sound, though? Doesn't that make him look weak to his adversaries?
You'd think so, but on the contrary, it builds immutable, cryptographically secure trust with his audience. If the state attempts to launch a smear campaign, painting him as a shadowy, sophisticated cyber villain pulling the strings of a digital cartel well, the narrative instantly collapses.
How so?
The community looks at the state's narrative, and then they look at Hill, a man who literally just spent the last 3 hours on a live audio stream discussing his panic attacks while analyzing Jenks murder logs. The authenticity of his radical transparency mathematically negates the state's PR fiction. It is data over drama.
Data over drama. I like that. But to execute that level of transparency, you run into a massive infrastructure problem. You can't rely on traditional corporate platforms to host dissident operations. I mean, we've seen how quickly major social networks will shadow ban a user or just capitulate to a state-issued takedown request.
Oh, instantly. If you are going to war with the great machine, you cannot fight on a battlefield owned by a corporation.
You need sovereign infrastructure. And that requirement gave birth to the Cybermidnight Club.
Yes. The Cybermidnight ecosystem.
Let's dive deep into this because this is where Hill's influence truly scales globally. The sources describe it as a live-first anti-podcast, which is a fascinating term.
It's deliberate positioning against the highly sanitized, overproduced nature of corporate threat intelligence media. Because traditional InfoSec media often feels like, well, a vendor pitch.
Yeah, it does, by our firewall.
Exactly. But the Cybermidnight Club is a raw intelligence fusion. It operates across multiple vectors. You have deeply technical written forensic reports, exhaustively detailed with timeline reconstructions and OSINT open source intelligence fusion.
But the core of it seems to be the live audio. He utilizes X Spaces, formerly Twitter Spaces, and Telegram channels to host completely unscripted, sprawling discussions with thousands of listeners. He's building a central hub for what he terms narrative true crime InfoSec.
And it isn't just theoretical posturing. He actively deploys the Cybermidnight ecosystem into live geopolitical crises. The 2026 LATAM incidents outlined in the dossiers are perfect case studies of this infrastructure in action.
Let's examine the B-Prime breach in Mexico.
The B-Prime situation is laden with irony. B-Prime is a prominent cybersecurity firm. They sell defense. And yet, they suffered a catastrophic data hemorrhage. We are talking about the exposure of approximately 53 gigabytes of hypersensitive client telemetry, including live surveillance feeds.
Wow. And Hill documented this extensively, branding the incident Cazador Cazado, the hunter hunted.
And the vector for this massive compromise. The intelligence suggests it was the absence of multi-factor authentication on their core administrative portals.
It's the 2014 Círculo Católico admin failure all over again, but this time perpetrated by the very people selling the security solutions.
Exactly. And the institutional response was entirely predictable. B-Prime initiated the protocol of silence. They minimized the scope of the exfiltration, claiming it was just non-sensitive metadata. But more aggressively, they deployed their legal apparatus.
They sued people.
They initiated SLAPP suits, strategic lawsuits against public participation, against the independent researchers and journalists who are analyzing the leaked data.
So they used aggressive corporate litigation as an incident response tool. They literally tried to sue the truth out of existence.
But they couldn't sue Hill because he utilized the asymmetric playbook. From within the Cybermidnight ecosystem, he published the cryptographically verified evidence of the surveillance feeds. He demonstrated the lack of MFA. He executed the proxy pivot, likely leveraging GDPR implications regarding the exposed data of European clients within the B-Prime dataset.
He completely outflanked their legal threats with radical transparency.
He forced the technical reality into the light. But, the B-Prime incident pales in comparison to the stakes of the Tuidantel biometric breach in Uruguay and the subsequent Pampa leaks.
Yeah, this incident wasn't just corporate embarrassment. It was a fundamental compromise of national security infrastructure.
Antel is the state telecommunications backbone. Tuit is the infrastructure handling digital identity and biometric authentication for citizens.
And when we talk about a biometric breach, we aren't talking about stolen passwords. You can change a password. You cannot change your fingerprint hash or your facial recognition telemetry.
Once it's gone, it's gone.
When this breach began to surface, the institutional panic was immediate. The corporate firewalls and state PR teams went into hyperdrive to launder the narrative. They issued statements describing the anomalies as a minor glitch in the API routing.
And when the glitch narrative failed to contain the fallout, the state apparatus reverted to its 2017 playbook. They needed a scapegoat to project strength, so they ended up doxing a group of teenagers, attempting to frame them in the media as the sophisticated masterminds of a digital cartel responsible for the siege.
This is where Hill's methodology reaches a level of operational audacity that is genuinely staggering. Operating entirely outside the state apparatus, he uses the Cybermidnight channels to dismantle the institutional narrative in real time.
Real-time OSINT fusion.
Right. He applies OSINT fusion to track the actual threat actors. He identifies a syndicate operating under the moniker Cronus Mafia.
And he doesn't just passively track them. He initiates direct, verifiable contact.
Wait, really? He is interfacing directly with the Cronus Mafia threat actors on encrypted Telegram channels.
Yes. He's engaged in live dialogue with the syndicate that is actively exploiting the national biometric infrastructure. He gets them to validate the exposed API keys. He extracts a timeline from the attackers, proving that the central systems were fully compromised in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes.
So while the Ministry of Interior is holding a highly sanitized press conference assuring the public that the glitch is contained and the teenage cartel leaders are being apprehended, Hill is broadcasting the cryptographic receipts from the actual attackers, proving the front door was kicked off its hinges.
He absolutely degrades the legitimacy of the state's forensic theater.
Okay, I have to pause here, because this is where we have to look at this critically. I'm looking at a man who is conducting live intelligence operations via Telegram with international extortion syndicates. He's publishing 50-page forensic teardowns. But simultaneously, the dossier note he's writing deeply personal cyberpunk novellas like Violetta Digital.
Right.
And he is producing and releasing original synthwave music on platforms like Spotify under aliases like Summer of Love, My Life in Binary. The sources explicitly state that this music serves as an emotional exhaust pipe, a way to process the severe PTSD from his maximum security isolation.
It is a profoundly unorthodox operational footprint.
It is, and I have to ask, doesn't this entirely blur the line? I mean, if you are an enterprise CSO or a government intelligence director evaluating the validity of these forensic reports, do you trust an analyst who interweaves rigorous API vulnerability disclosures with Spotify tracks about his trauma?
It's a valid question.
Does this hyper-personalized multimedia approach cross the boundary from objective intelligence analysis into a chaotic, highly public personal vendetta against the state that wronged him?
It is the most common critique leveled against him. And the intelligence dossiers explicitly acknowledge this as a structural limitation. The Cybermidnight ecosystem is aggressively self-referential. When the architect of the analytical framework is also the primary case study, the demarcation between objective, detached scientific analysis and personal brand building becomes very porous.
It makes it incredibly easy for the institutions he attacks to dismiss him. They can just point to the music, the novellas, the Telegram chats, and say to the public, look at this erratic behavior. He is just a disgruntled former inmate with a grudge and a microphone. Ignore his data.
They absolutely attempt that narrative. But empirical reality is stubborn. The data proves the efficacy of his approach. Despite the unorthodox delivery, out of those 5.5 million global InfoSec professionals, Hill's specific niche reach places him firmly in the top 5 to 15% of independent advocates genuinely shaping regional policy and legal reform.
A significant catalyst for that global reach was his feature on the Darknet Diaries podcast, episode 25, which pulled in nearly 500,000 verified plays. That initial signal boost allowed him to seed his framework globally.
And his intelligence output is consistently validated. His forensic teardowns are cited by major credible news organizations, Clarin, Yahoo News, databreaches.net. His findings hold up under peer review.
Because the underlying methodology is completely rigorous. He might package the intelligence within a narrative of personal trauma, but the actual reports utilize probabilistic assessments, strict timeline reconstruction, contradiction analysis, and cryptographic proof.
You can call it a vendetta if you want. He certainly holds a deep, justified animosity toward the Great Machine, but he channels the kinetic energy of that trauma entirely into verifiable forensic truth. In an ecosystem where massive institutions lie by default to protect their share price or political capital, a highly competent engineer with an unyielding vendetta for transparency is exactly the kind of auditor the technical community relies upon.
Let's step back and synthesize this. We've covered a massive expanse of territory today. We've gone from a kid modifying video games on a Sinclair Spectrum to a man rotting in maximum security because a judge couldn't understand a port scan, to an independent intelligence node weaponizing European privacy law to shatter Latin American corporate cover-ups.
This is a huge arc.
What is the fundamental through line of Alberto Daniel Hill's trajectory?
The core thesis running through all this source material is that cybersecurity has fundamentally evolved. It is no longer purely a technical discipline. The era where InfoSec was just about configuring Cisco routers, patching Windows servers, and analyzing malware signatures, that era is dead.
So what is it now?
Cybersecurity is now the primary ideological and geopolitical battlefield of the 21st century. The entity that controls the digital infrastructure controls the truth.
Alberto Daniel Hill is a critical figure because he lived the absolute worst-case scenario of this evolution. He was crushed by a technologically illiterate state apparatus that prioritized its own narrative over objective reality. But rather than being destroyed by that injustice, he reverse-engineered it. He built the forensic risk indicator, the asymmetric playbook, the Cybermidnight ecosystem.
He took the murky, terrifying abstraction of algorithmic jurisprudence and transformed it into a reproducible mathematical defense strategy. He built a movement, #HackingIsNotACrime, to demand legal safe harbors for ethical researchers, ensuring that intellectual curiosity is protected rather than criminalized.
But I want to pivot to you, the listener. You might be listening to this thinking, this is fascinating, but I'm not an ethical hacker. I don't run Nmap scans against healthcare providers. I don't use PGP keys. Why does Alberto Daniel Hill's war against the Great Machine matter to my daily life?
It matters deeply because you are the payload. Your life is digitized. Your medical history, your financial transactions, your biometric hashes, your private communications, they all reside within the vulnerable databases of these institutions. When a massive corporation or government agency prioritizes its public image over operational security, when they default to the protocol of silence and engage in forensic theater instead of fixing the broken architecture, you are the one left completely exposed.
In networking architecture, we talk about the OSI model. Layers 1 through 7 cover the physical cables all the way up to the software applications. The sources in our dossier refer to this institutional failure as the Layer 8 threat. Layer 8 is the human factor, the ego, the corporate negligence, the political preservation.
The Layer 8 threat is the most catastrophic vulnerability in modern infrastructure. It is the point where unvetted, insecure code collides with fundamental human rights. When institutions are allowed to cover up their breaches, your digital sovereignty is effectively erased. Hill's entire framework of radical transparency and asymmetric defense is designed to keep those institutions terrified of the truth, which ultimately protects the passive citizens whose data is held hostage.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative concept. Throughout this entire deep dive, the conflict has been framed as the individual dissident versus the centralized state, the ethical hacker versus the great machine. But buried in the final sections of Hill's 2026 Strategic Intelligence Reports, there is an extrapolation of current technological trends that completely shatters that paradigm.
It is a fascinating and somewhat terrifying look at the near horizon of digital governance.
Hill predicts that the future of digital security and the arbitration of truth will soon exist entirely beyond the concept of geographical borders. Right now, we are seeing the deployment of advanced real-time AI translation protocols that are effectively annihilating language barriers across the internet. Hill foresees this frictionless communication, enabling the rise of what he terms cyber syndicalism.
Consider the mechanics of that. Imagine the decentralized psych-legal certs, the independent intelligence nodes, the ethical hacking collectives across Latin America, Asia, Eastern Europe, all merging seamlessly in real time. A global, borderless authority of digital auditors operating outside the jurisdiction of any single nation-state.
Think about the geopolitical implications. What happens when a decentralized swarm of independent researchers, utilizing zero-contact disclosure and mathematically sound FRI scores, possesses significantly more auditing power, technical capability, and forensic reach than the sovereign nation-state they are investigating?
If a borderless union can cryptographically prove that a government is lying to its citizens in real time, the fundamental concept of state authority shifts. The great machine relies on isolation and jurisdictional boundaries to maintain its power. The swarm removes those boundaries. The machine will no longer be able to demand a localized scapegoat because the global swarm will hold the immutable cryptographic receipts.
We started this deep dive talking about the comfort of an X-ray, the deeply human desire for a clean, binary answer. The machine points, and we believe it. But as the life and work of Alberto Daniel Hill demonstrates, when the institution operating the X-ray machine is compromised by ego, incompetence, or self-preservation, you cannot blindly trust the diagnosis.
You must acquire the literacy to read the raw telemetry yourself.
Because in an era defined by the algorithmic jurisprudence of the great machine, radical transparency might be the only viable medicine we have left.